You have displayed your work in an extraordinary range of really different settings.
Yeah.
How do you find that the setting changes the work, or do you find that the setting changes the work, or how you see it, or how you think viewers see the individual sculptures in different environments?
Well, it's quite difficult to say. I mean, obviously, I see the work, first of all, in the studio, without any consideration of any situation it's going to be into. And very often, I mean, because of the way museums and galleries are, they're usually very neutral spaces. So that's something one gets used to. And I think that's my first, if you like, adjudication about the setting, if you want. But I mean, a setting like this it's an historical setting with a lot of nature, even if it's very cultivated nature. I mean, with a rhododendron garden is not a common occurrence. So it is very, very special. But the sculptures, I mean, they have to be strong enough to have their own, I mean, they have their own lives and they have their own position in the world. And I think sometimes, I'm not sure how this is working, but I mean, the contrasts of time, I mean, all the energy that's been put into this enormous construction, the building behind me, and then a totally different kind of energy, they work together, I think, in some way. I mean, not always complementary, but it works, yeah, definitely. I mean, the works in nature anyway. It was something I didn't know about my work for many years, but having had the opportunity to put work outside, because I don't make work, I don't try to make pictures of human beings or horses or something like that, because I'm not copying part of reality. Then I have to have another reason to make stuff. So I have to, very often I'm interested in a certain inner structure, construction or structure of what's going on and why, not the question, oh, this is what I look like, but why do I look like this? You know, so how do I end up looking like that? So that's how I make the sculpture. And then sometimes when I put the work in a forest or in a setting like this, I realize there are correspondences between the inner structures of the work and inner structures of the nature around me. So that sets up a different kind of dialogue than it does, obviously, with architecture.
And do you find that you notice different things about the work according to whether you're putting them in a natural setting or an architectural setting?
Possibly, but I think the experience of making them is, for me, so overwhelming and unforgettable, and coming to that point where this is a new thing, I seeing everything else pretty marginal after that. I mean, sometimes things just, for whatever reason, they don't work in certain settings, but often enough they do.
The work behind you is actually a brand new one, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
So tell us a bit about this one.
I was making quite complicated works, hybrid works, moving from one form onto the other. And to do that, I was making a lot of, I found out they had a lot of internal surfaces that I couldn't depict. And I even stupidly made sculptures where there was an inside sculpture and an outside sculpture. And of course you couldn't see the inside sculpture. But then the inside structure started to really interest me. And I thought, well, okay, so I can continue to make that. And this is a work that's made, or is carved originally in this size in polyurethane. It's a kind of soft, relatively soft carvable material. And then it's taken in the foundry. And it's really just an energetic experience of making it. And I wanted to have that kind of energy in the space.
What is your process? I mean, I know you do quite a lot of drawing, and there are drawings in the house on display as well as the sculptures. Yeah. But where do you begin with the work? How does it happen for you?
Well, okay, drawing is really important to me. I mean, it's something I do. You can sort out a lot. Making sculpture is not particularly easy. You've got to have all the material and the ways, the space to do it and the time. But I mean, drawing is, you can get through a lot of stuff easily, relatively easily. But really, honestly said, I mean, I think most artists, they make their work, and while you're making a work, you make a certain sequence of decisions. Some of those decisions are bigger ones than others. And when you finish the work, you think, well, this is this is the way I've taken, and that's what it looks like. Yeah, but on reflection, if I'd changed that decision there and here, then it would have been looking different, it would have a different form, it would have a different feeling, it would probably have a different name, and therefore at the end of making something, you're left with all sorts of options that you haven't taken yet. So that's the work. You know, I don't do very much. The work makes itself, actually.
So that sets you off on the next one, does it?
Very often, yes. And sometimes there are bridges, like you're making something and suddenly, oh God, why couldn't I have thought of that 20 years ago? So I think I'm making 34 sculptures right now. Some of them I've been trying to make since 4 or 5 years, and they're not going to go anywhere. I can see that, I can understand that. And some things like this one, I just thought, have a go, and I made it in the last 6 months or something, you know. So some things are very fast and spontaneous, and other things just take. And then sometimes you get the chain of decisions in this group of work suddenly springs across and has a relevance in a different context.
It's because you do have certain sort of themes in your work, don't you? Or themes, perhaps not quite the right word.
Yeah, I see sort of little families of work.
Yes.
I mean, the early forms have been very important, where I've taken things that exist in reality and kind of, if you like, hybridize it or morphologize them from one known thing onto the other. The idea being, as always, not to make what exists, but to try and find out something that doesn't exist. I mean, that's what really interests me. I mean, we're a whole of, you know, human beings making stuff. We make all of everything just to, you know, whether it's clothes and furniture and buildings, because it's kind of, that's what keeps our naked backside from the naked soil. I mean, that's that layer of stuff we make between nature and our own bodies. That's our culture. That has a sort of, and then for me, a kind of, if you like, survivalistic background to all of that making. Sculpture's outside of that framework. Sculpture is not utilitarian, it's not useful. If it is, if sometimes people say it, I'm very suspicious of it. But what it does do, there are many, many more things that do not exist as things that do exist. So there's an enormous potential of form that we just haven't, you know, in our reality, we only see the tip of the iceberg. And so really, sculpture is one way of just trying to find forms and things that mean something, that give us a different emotion, give us new terms, new freedoms. I mean, that's all that sculpture does.
And you draw on natural forms and on man-made forms.
Yes, I mean, the materials I use are mainly man-made materials. I mean, sometimes stone, but glass, bronze, aluminium, plywood, all of those materials are actually man-made materials that usually used to make, very rigid and repetitive forms. And so I take stuff that has been and try to I don't even try it, just push it along so it takes a different direction, that's all.
You've talked about making your pieces being a sort of dialogue between you and the material usually having the last word. But how does that work when you're making monumental sculpture where there are a lot of people involved, there's a lot of process involved? How do you manage to have that ongoing dialogue with the material as it develops? Well,
exactly. First of all, the previous history of making things. Secondly, the drawings. And then I don't make sculpture this big to start with. I mean, I tend to make smaller works. And then after I see, oh, okay, that's something that I'm learning here, then I can progress. Once, you know, I mean, I always say the same thing, you have to forgive me, but if you take a block of clay, this size, whatever it is, 10 kilograms of clay, there are billions, if not infinite number of forms in there. Most of it's just dust means nothing at all. So, but as soon as you start to move the material around somewhere, you know, certain forms start to affect you. I mean, you get an emotional or a sort of idea about things, and suddenly, oh, well, and I work in that direction, trying to follow that. So all I'm doing is at the massive possibilities, just trying something significant that is significant to myself. I mean, I always think it's interesting when we talk about symbolics, the idea of pulling things together, making them, having them, giving a concentrated meaning. obviously very different from diabolic, where it's all flying apart, and we know that's not good. So we have this kind of, and that's all one's really doing, one's making art, you know. I think that's the essence of art, and, you know, I mean, how to change the quality of people's lives. Obviously, it's good if you're healthy, and it's good if you have some financial, you know, whatever economic possibilities, but that's not the same for everybody. And then you have health and maybe religion if you have it. But culture is really something that really changes people's lives, you know. And if you learn to sort of look at the world and in your perception turn that into ideas and emotions, that is an enormous enrichment of your own existence and an appreciation of one's own lives. And I think that's what art does for people, and it's meant so much for me in my life. I mean, it's not about processes, it's really just about me kind of expanding myself into the material, really.
And I think you've started to use the computer as well to help you along that road, is that right?
Well, I don't, because all I can just about send emails, but now I've got assistance. Once what one did previously, obviously when you get a complicated form, one went through moulding processes to make a cast, and then some. These are very unwieldy processes, and they're actually, I mean, honestly, they're quite environmentally, you know, you need silicon and wax and then plaster and blah, blah, blah. It gets very, very messy. And nowadays, and once you make a sculpture, people come along and they scan it in, and that's the new way of forming it up. So that's a new possibility of making stuff. But I use it as a tool. The new technology as a tool in the making process, but not to generate the work. I don't know how to do that.
One of the other new work you've got here is Mask, which is around the other side of the house.
I was asked by the theatre in Wuppertal, there was an area, they wanted a sculpture put in the entry, in the foyer. And I just came up with the idea after a while of getting two Janus masks, theatre masks, and slipping them inside each other. And so in doing that, you can just about they have a somewhat human quality, but also have very highly abstract quality. And I found that sort of related to my ideas. I love geology and landscape and something like that. So, I mean, so it was a very, very simple process. And then, so that's really what that work is. And this work here has been finished very, very recently, just came out of the foundry. And I'm very happy that its first stop in its existence is here in front of the building. So that was a lucky coincidence.
Yes,
yeah.
It picks up the hues of the stone really well, doesn't it? It fits.
Yeah, it does.
Fits
We actually,
well.
I'll be honest, it was previewed somewhere else. We wanted to, and when we brought it in, I just saw, well, you can't not do that. Yeah.
I mean, you were born in Britain, but you're based in Germany. How is coming between the two? Do you find that there's a different attitude to art? Is it very different being in the different places?
Yeah, there is quite a substantial difference, to be honest. I mean, when I first moved to Germany in the 70s and 80s, I was astounded how many people in the population would go to museums relative to Britain, which had in the 60s and 70s quite a small public that were interested, relatively small. And very often the media, what do I call it, banter, in a sense, was always, you know, whether it was Henry Moore or whatever it was rather belittling, you know, it was Carl Andre, controversies or whatever. So a little bit sort of, I don't know, the Germans take it on a different level. I mean, was assimilated quick. But I think in the meantime, there's not that much difference. But historically, it was more. Maybe in Germany, because of the events of history, Germans felt they needed a new imagery, new iconography, and so they were really, artists like Joseph Beuys were seriously looking for new art and new forms. So, and I don't know if that was the case particularly in Britain at that time. But in the meantime, obviously, but there is a national characteristic in the work.
Is it good to be here where you're bringing in a public, some of whom will be here because of Bridgerton and Brideshead, who will then see your work in passing, as it were, in addition to the people who will come specifically because they want to see it?
You know, quite honestly, for me it's a privilege to be here and to have the opportunity to put the work in this fantastic setting. But I don't think very much about the public. I don't want to send messages. I have this life where I just am in the studio and I can discover these things for myself. And I'm very, very appreciative when people can pick up on what I've discovered for myself. That's all I'm interested in.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.